My kids' teacher called me screaming. Your child stood up for themselves. The phone rang at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I could hear Mrs. Henderson screaming before I even got it fully to my ear. Mrs. Parker, you need to get down here right now. Your son I cannot believe, this is absolutely unacceptable behavior. I was standing in the break room at the insurance office where I work, holding my sad desk salad, trying to process why my 8-year-old's teacher sounded like she was having a complete meltdown. Mrs. Henderson, please slow down. What happened? Is Tommy hurt? 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 Your son just assaulted another student. He pushed Brandon Matthews right off the monkey bars during recess. Brandon could have been seriously injured. My stomach dropped. Tommy had never hurt a fly. He was the kid who brought injured beetles inside to help him feel better. He cried when we had to return library books because he felt bad for taking them away from other kids who might want to read them. That doesn't sound like Tommy at all. Are you sure? Are you questioning what I witnessed with my own eyes? Her voice pitched even higher. Your son walked right up to Brandon and shoved him. Completely unprovoked. We have a zero-tolerance policy for violence, Mrs. Parker. I set my salad down, my hands already shaking. Okay, I'm coming. But Mrs. Henderson, Tommy has been telling me that kids have been bothering him at recess. Did something happen before? There you go, making excuses already. This is exactly the problem. Brandon is one of our most well-behaved students. His parents, Dr. and Mrs. Matthews, are pillars of this community. They've donated over $15,000 to our new playground equipment fund alone. Something cold settled in my chest. What does that have to do with? What it has to do with, Mrs. Parker, is that some children know how to behave appropriately, and others. She let the sentence hang there like a threat. Others what? Others need to learn their place. I'll see you in my classroom in 20 minutes. And Mrs. Parker? You might want to start thinking about anger management counseling for Thomas. This kind of aggressive behavior, well, it often runs in families from certain backgrounds. The line went dead. I stood there staring at my phone, replaying what just happened. Certain backgrounds? Tommy needing to learn his place? And why did she feel the need to mention how much money the Matthews family donated? I grabbed my keys and purse, my mind racing. Tommy had been different these past few weeks. Quieter than usual, which was saying something. He'd started having stomachaches on Sunday nights, begging to stay home on Monday mornings. When I asked what was wrong, he'd just shrug and say school was fine. But last night, he'd asked me something that broke my heart. Mom, are we poor? I'd asked why he was wondering about that, and he'd gotten that look, the one where he was trying to protect me from something. Just wondering. Like, are we the kind of poor where people think we're bad? Driving toward Lincoln Elementary, I couldn't shake Mrs. Henderson's tone. She wasn't just angry about a playground incident. She was furious about something else entirely. And the way she said Tommy needed to learn his place, what 8-year-old needs to learn their place? I pulled into the school parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Whatever happened on that playground, I had a feeling I was about to discover it was just the tip of something much worse. Walking through Lincoln Elementary's main entrance, I noticed how different everything looked when you weren't here for a happy parent-teacher conference or school play. The cheerful bulletin boards and colorful artwork felt like a facade hiding something uglier underneath. Mrs. Henderson's classroom was at the end of the hall, and I could hear her voice before I even got close. She was talking to someone, her tone completely different from the screaming phone call, sweet, almost fawning. So sorry this had to happen today, especially with everything your family has done for our school. Brandon is such a wonderful boy, and I want you to know this kind of behavior is absolutely not tolerated here. I knocked on the doorframe. Mrs. Henderson looked up from where she sat next to a woman in an expensive-looking suit, definitely Mrs. Matthews. A boy who had to be Brandon sat in a tiny chair, looking completely unharmed and actually kind of smug. Tommy sat alone on the opposite side of the room, still in his recess clothes, dirt on his knees and a scratch on his cheek that definitely hadn't been there this morning. Tommy, baby, are you okay? I rushed over to him. I'm fine, Mom, he whispered, but his eyes were red like he'd been crying. Mrs. Parker. Mrs. Henderson's voice was ice cold again. This is Dr. Matthews. We were just discussing the incident. Dr. Matthews stood up, and I could practically feel her looking me up and down, taking in my Target blouse, my scuffed shoes, my purse with a broken zipper I kept meaning to replace. Your son seriously injured my child, she said without any introduction. I looked at Brandon, who was swinging his legs and seemed perfectly fine. He looks okay to me. Tommy, sweetheart, what happened? Mrs. Parker, Mrs. Henderson cut in sharply, we're not here to get his side of the story. He pushed another student. The why doesn't matter. The why absolutely matters. Tommy, tell me what happened. Tommy glanced nervously at Mrs. Henderson, then at Brandon. Brandon and his friends, they were playing a game. What kind of game? They called it poor tag. His voice got smaller. They chase kids like me and try to touch us because they say being poor is contagious. Brandon said I couldn't use the monkey bars because my mom probably can't afford the doctor if I get hurt. My blood pressure spiked. He said what? That's enough, Mrs. Henderson snapped. Thomas, we discussed your tendency to exaggerate. I'm not exaggerating. And then Brandon pushed me first, and I fell, and everyone was laughing, and he said, Tommy's voice cracked. He said that charity cases like me should be grateful we're even allowed to go to school here. Charity cases? I turned to Mrs. Henderson. And you witnessed this? Dr. Matthews stepped forward. My son would never say such things. We've taught him to be inclusive of all economic backgrounds. Brandon is a natural leader, Mrs. Henderson added quickly. Sometimes other children misinterpret normal playground dynamics. I stared at her. Normal playground dynamics? A game called poor tag? Children make up games all the time, Mrs. Parker. Thomas clearly misunderstood. Mom, Tommy interrupted quietly, I have something to show you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device I'd given him last month, a kid-friendly voice recorder I bought so he could practice his reading aloud. Tommy was recording during recess? Dr. Matthews asked. Mrs. Henderson's face went completely white. Thomas, put that away. Right now. But Tommy looked at me with an expression far too serious for an 8-year-old. Mom, you need to hear what she said about us. My heart hammered as I looked at the recorder in Tommy's small hands. Mrs. Henderson had gone from white to green, and she kept glancing between the device and Dr. Matthews like she was calculating something. Thomas, honey, you know recording people without permission isn't appropriate, Dr. Matthews said in that condescending tone adults use when they're trying to manipulate kids. Why don't you give that to Mrs. Henderson? No, I said firmly, stepping closer to Tommy. Let me hear it. Mrs. Parker, this is highly irregular. Mrs. Henderson's voice was shaking now. We should focus on addressing Thomas's violent behavior, not. Play it, Tommy. He pressed the button, and suddenly the classroom filled with the sounds of playground chaos, kids laughing, swings creaking, the distant sound of a basketball bouncing. Then I heard Tommy's voice, small and hopeful. Mrs. Henderson? Brandon pushed me off the monkey bars and I scraped my knee. Can you help? There was a pause, then Mrs. Henderson's voice, clearer than I'd ever heard it. Tommy, what have we talked about? Brandon's family donated the money for these monkey bars. Maybe if your mother contributed more to the school instead of just taking up space, you'd have more say in how they get used. My mouth fell open. Dr. Matthews shifted uncomfortably. But the recording kept going. Tommy's voice again, but he pushed me really hard, and now all the kids are saying I can't play anywhere because. Because what? Because you're a scholarship kid who gets free lunch and free supplies while other families actually pay their fair share? Mrs. Henderson's voice was casual, like she was discussing the weather. Tommy, some children here have parents who are doctors and lawyers and business owners. Their families make this school possible. Other children, well, they need to be grateful for what they get and not make trouble. I felt like I might throw up. Tommy's voice on the recording was barely a whisper, so I can't tell when kids are being mean to me. You can tell me, but Tommy, you have to understand, when Brandon or children like him are just playing around, maybe being a little rough, that's different than bullying. That's just how boys play. But when you push back, when you put your hands on a child whose parents have invested in this school, that's completely unacceptable. The recording crackled, and I could hear Tommy starting to cry. But it hurts when they push me. And they say mean things about me and Mom. Well, maybe if those things weren't true, it wouldn't hurt so much. The silence in the classroom was deafening as the recording stopped. Dr. Matthews was staring at Mrs. Henderson like she'd never seen her before. Brandon had stopped swinging his legs and was looking confused. Mrs. Henderson, Dr. Matthews said slowly, did you really say those things to an 8-year-old child? Mrs. Henderson's face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on desperate damage control. It's taken completely out of context. I was trying to help Thomas understand social dynamics. You told my son that mean things about us might be true? My voice came out stronger than I felt. You told him he should be grateful when other kids hurt him? Sarah, Mrs. Parker, you have to understand, managing classroom dynamics is complex. Some children require different approaches. Different approaches based on how much money their parents have? Tommy tugged on my sleeve. Mom, there's more. From yesterday, and last week too. Mrs. Henderson lunged forward. Thomas, that's enough. Give me that device right now. Like hell, I said, pulling Tommy behind me. We're leaving. Tommy, grab your backpack. Mrs. Parker, you cannot remove Thomas from school grounds during school hours without proper. I was already walking toward the door, Tommy's hand in mine. Watch me. Mrs. Parker, if you leave school grounds with Thomas without following proper dismissal procedures, I'll have to call security, Mrs. Henderson called after us, her voice cracking with panic. I turned around in the doorway. Go ahead. Call them. Call whoever you want. But first, call Principal Morrison and tell him I'll be in his office in 5 minutes with this recording. There's no need to escalate this situation, Dr. Matthews said, standing up quickly. I'm sure we can work this out reasonably. Reasonably? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your son has been tormenting mine for weeks, and his teacher has been enabling it because you write checks. What exactly seems reasonable about that? Dr. Matthews glanced at Brandon, who was starting to look less smug and more nervous. Brandon, is it true? Have you been playing games about other children's families? Brandon's eyes darted to Mrs. Henderson, like he was looking for permission to speak. That look told me everything I needed to know about how this dynamic worked. Brandon, honey, Dr. Matthews pressed, her voice gentler but firm. Tell Mommy the truth. We were just playing, he mumbled. Mrs. Henderson said some kids are different, and we should help them understand how things work here. Help them understand how? That some families are important and some aren't. Dr. Matthews' face went ashen. She slowly turned to look at Mrs. Henderson. You told the children that some families are more important than others? Dr. Matthews, children need to understand social hierarchies. It's part of preparing them for the real world. I was simply helping Brandon develop leadership skills. Leadership skills? My voice rose. You were teaching him to bully kids whose parents have less money. Tommy squeezed my hand. Mom, should I play the one from yesterday? Mrs. Henderson actually took a step backward. Thomas, stop this right now. You're in serious trouble for recording without permission. He's in trouble? I stared at her. Tommy, play yesterday's recording. This time the audio was clearer, like Tommy had been closer to Mrs. Henderson when she was talking. I could hear her voice talking to another adult, probably a parent volunteer. Honestly, I don't know why they keep accepting these scholarship applications. The Matthews family alone donated enough for the new computer lab, but we still have to deal with charity cases taking up space that could go to children from families who actually contribute. A woman's voice responded, well, the district probably has requirements. Requirements, yes, but there are ways around requirements if you're creative. I've been documenting behavioral issues with some of our less fortunate students. Create enough of a paper trail, and eventually the problem solves itself. My knees almost gave out. You've been documenting fake behavioral issues? Not fake, Mrs. Henderson said quickly. Thomas has been increasingly disruptive. Because he was being bullied. Mom, Tommy said quietly, there's more. The recording continued. Mrs. Henderson's voice again, the Parker boy is the perfect example. Mother works some dead-end job, probably didn't even go to college. These people don't value education the way proper families do. When he inevitably acts out because he can't keep up academically or socially, I'll have grounds to recommend he be better suited for, well, somewhere else. Dr. Matthews was staring at Mrs. Henderson like she was looking at a stranger. Diane, what has gotten into you? This is not who I thought you were. Jennifer, you have to understand, I'm trying to maintain standards. Your family, the Andersons, the Kellys, you've all invested so much in making this school excellent. When we dilute that with children who don't fit our community values. Our community values? Dr. Matthews' voice was getting louder. What values are those, exactly? Tommy tugged my sleeve again. The principal's coming, Mom. I can hear his shoes in the hallway. Sure enough, Mr. Morrison appeared in the doorway, looking harried. Ladies, I got a call from the office about raised voices. What's going on here? Mrs. Henderson immediately shifted into sweet teacher mode. Principal Morrison, we're just dealing with a discipline issue. Thomas Parker pushed another student during recess, and his mother is refusing to cooperate with our standard procedures. That's not what this is about, I said firmly, holding up Tommy's recorder. Mr. Morrison, you need to hear this. Mr. Morrison looked between all of us, Mrs. Henderson pale and panicked, Dr. Matthews holding Brandon protectively but eyeing the teacher with growing suspicion, and me clutching Tommy's hand with the recorder in my other palm like it was made of gold. Mrs. Parker, perhaps we should discuss this in my office, he said diplomatically. We can discuss it right here, I said. Unless Mrs. Henderson has somewhere else she needs to be. The teacher shot me a look that could have melted steel. Principal Morrison, I think we're dealing with a parent who's gotten emotionally overwrought about normal disciplinary procedures. Perhaps it would be best if. Play it, Tommy, I said. Mr. Morrison frowned. Play what? Tommy looked up at him with those serious 8-year-old eyes. I recorded Mrs. Henderson talking about kids like me. She said some really mean stuff. Thomas, recording people without consent is inappropriate, Mr. Morrison began, but I cut him off. So is telling a child that he deserves to be bullied because his family doesn't donate enough money. Mr. Morrison's eyebrows shot up. I'm sorry, what? I hit play on the section where Mrs. Henderson told Tommy that Brandon's family had paid for the monkey bars, so maybe Tommy should be grateful and not make trouble. As her voice filled the room, Mr. Morrison's expression shifted from confused to concerned to absolutely horrified. When it got to the part about Tommy needing to understand that some families were more important, Dr. Matthews made a small, disgusted sound. Diane, how could you say these things to a child? Mrs. Henderson was sweating now. Jennifer, you're misunderstanding the context. What context makes it okay to tell an 8-year-old that he doesn't matter because his mother isn't rich? Mr. Morrison held up a hand. Let me hear the rest of it. We played through the recording of her conversation with the parent volunteer, the part about charity cases, and creating documentation to get rid of students like Tommy. With each word, Mr. Morrison's face got redder. Mrs. Henderson, he said slowly when it finished, are you telling me you've been fabricating behavioral incidents? I haven't fabricated anything. I've been documenting legitimate concerns about students who don't fit our school culture. Our school culture? Mr. Morrison's voice was getting dangerously quiet. And what culture is that, exactly? Dr. Matthews stepped forward, still holding Brandon's hand. Principal Morrison, I need you to know that my family never asked for special treatment. We donate because we believe in public education, not because we want to buy privilege for our son. Brandon tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mommy, Mrs. Henderson said you and Daddy were the good kind of parents. She said kids like Tommy have the bad kind. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Matthews looked down at her son, then at Tommy, then at Mrs. Henderson with something like horror in her eyes. You've been teaching the children to discriminate based on their family's income? I've been teaching them about reality, Mrs. Henderson snapped, finally dropping her sweet teacher act. Some parents contribute to the school community, and others just take. Some families value education and raise children accordingly, and others send us kids who can't keep up and then blame us when. Stop. Mr. Morrison's voice cut through her rant like a blade. Just, stop talking. Tommy stepped closer to me. Mom, should I play the one where she talks about trying to get me kicked out? Mrs. Henderson went white. There is no such recording. Yes, there is, Tommy said matter-of-factly. From last Friday. You were talking to Mrs. Chen about how if you wrote enough reports about me being disruptive, you could recommend I get transferred somewhere else. Mr. Morrison closed his eyes for a long moment, like he was trying to process something too awful to believe. When he opened them, he looked directly at Mrs. Henderson. Clean out your desk. Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Excuse me? You heard me. Clean out your desk. You're suspended pending a full investigation, effective immediately. You cannot suspend me based on some child's illegal recordings. Her voice cracked with desperation. I have tenure, I have rights, I've been teaching here for 12 years. 12 years of what, exactly? Dr. Matthews interrupted, her voice shaking with anger. 12 years of teaching children that their worth is determined by their parents' bank accounts? Mr. Morrison pulled out his phone. I'm calling the district office right now. Mrs. Henderson, you'll need to surrender your keys and ID badge. This is insane. Jennifer, you know me, you know I care about children. I thought I knew you, Dr. Matthews said coldly. Apparently I was wrong. Tommy tugged on my sleeve again. Mom, there's one more. From this morning. Mrs. Henderson's face went from white to gray. Thomas, that's enough. Play it, baby, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. This recording was from earlier today, and I could hear Mrs. Henderson talking to someone in what sounded like the teacher's lounge. Finally have enough documentation on the Parker boy to make my case. 3 behavioral incidents this month, all carefully noted. The mother will probably cry and make excuses, but I have witnesses that he's been increasingly aggressive. A male voice, I recognized it as Mr. Kim, the PE teacher. But I've never seen Tommy be aggressive. He's actually one of the quieter kids in my class. Well, Mark, you don't see everything that happens in academic settings. These scholarship kids, they get frustrated when they can't keep up with the rigorous standards we maintain here. It's not their fault, really, they're just not equipped for this level of education. Diane, that seems harsh. Tommy's actually quite bright. Bright for his background, maybe. But when you compare him to students like Brandon Matthews or Sophie Anderson, children whose parents have advanced degrees and can provide proper educational support at home, well, the gaps become obvious. Mr. Morrison was typing furiously on his phone while listening. Dr. Matthews had her hand over her mouth like she might be sick. The recording continued. The beauty is, I've been documenting everything carefully. By the time I'm done, it'll look like Thomas escalated from minor disruptions to physical violence. No one will question the recommendation for alternative placement. Alternative placement? There's a program for at-risk youth across town. Much more appropriate for his circumstances. Mr. Morrison looked up from his phone. You were planning to have Tommy transferred to the disciplinary program at Westfield? I was considering all options for his educational success, Mrs. Henderson said stiffly. Westfield isn't for educational success, Dr. Matthews said, horrified. That's where they send kids who've been expelled. My colleague's nephew was there after he brought a knife to school. Tommy pressed closer to me. Mom, what's alternative placement? Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart, I said, but my heart was racing. She'd been planning to destroy my son's educational future over playground politics and donation dollars. Mr. Morrison pocketed his phone. The district supervisor is on her way. Mrs. Henderson, I need you to wait in the main office while I secure your classroom. This is a witch hunt, she said desperately. One disgruntled parent with illegal recordings, and you're throwing away 12 years of dedicated service? Dedicated service? I finally exploded. You've been psychologically abusing my 8-year-old. You told him he didn't matter, that he should be grateful when other kids hurt him, that his family wasn't good enough. I was preparing him for reality. Whose reality? Dr. Matthews demanded. Because in my reality, children don't get treated differently based on their parents' careers or income. Mr. Morrison stepped between us. That's enough. Mrs. Henderson, main office. Now. As she walked toward the door, she turned back with a look of pure venom. This isn't over, Mrs. Parker. You have no idea what you've just done to your son's future in this district. Tommy squeezed my hand tighter, but his voice was clear and strong. She's wrong, isn't she, Mom? About us not being good enough? I knelt down to his level, ignoring Mrs. Henderson's retreating figure. Baby, we are more than good enough. We belong anywhere we choose to be. Dr. Matthews cleared her throat softly. Principal Morrison, I think there's something else you need to know. She looked down at Brandon, who was still clinging to her hand. Brandon, tell Mr. Morrison about the game you and your friends have been playing. Brandon's eyes darted around the room nervously. I don't want to get in trouble. You won't get in trouble for telling the truth, sweetheart. But you might get in trouble if you don't. We play this game called Scholarship Tag, Brandon mumbled. Mrs. Henderson told us which kids get free lunch and free supplies, and we're supposed to help them understand. Mr. Morrison's jaw clenched. Help them understand what? That they should be grateful. And that they can't use the good stuff until kids like me are done with it. Brandon's voice got smaller. She said it was like teaching them manners. My stomach churned. Tommy, how long has this been going on? Since October, Tommy said quietly. Right after the fall fundraiser. Mrs. Henderson read the names of all the families who donated, and then she read the names of kids who benefit from the community's generosity. He made air quotes, mimicking her tone perfectly. Dr. Matthews looked horrified. She announced which children receive assistance? Publicly? She called it teaching gratitude, Tommy continued. She said we should thank the donor families whenever we saw them. Oh my God, I breathed. Tommy, why didn't you tell me? I tried. But every time I said kids were being mean, you called the school, and then Mrs. Henderson would pull me aside and say I was creating drama and making it harder for kids like me to fit in. Mr. Morrison was scribbling notes furiously. What exactly did she tell you during these conversations? She said that some families are contributors and some are beneficiaries, and beneficiaries need to be extra good so contributors don't get tired of helping. Tommy's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was reciting a lesson. She said if I kept complaining about normal kid stuff, it might make the school board think scholarship kids were too much trouble. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. She threatened you? Not threatened. She said she was preparing me for success and teaching me social awareness. Dr. Matthews turned to Brandon. Honey, did Mrs. Henderson ever talk to you about Tommy and the other kids who get assistance? Brandon nodded reluctantly. She said kids like Tommy's family need our help to learn how things work in good schools. And that if we were patient with them, it would show what good leaders we could be. Patient how? Like, if they couldn't afford the same clothes or supplies as us, we shouldn't make them feel bad. But we also shouldn't let them forget that other people paid for their stuff. Tommy suddenly spoke up. She made a chart. Everyone turned to stare at him. What kind of chart? Mr. Morrison asked. In her desk. She has a folder with all the scholarship kids' names, and she tracks incidents and interventions. She showed it to Mrs. Chen once when I was cleaning the whiteboard after school. Mr. Morrison immediately headed toward Mrs. Henderson's desk. Tommy, which drawer? Bottom left. It's in a green folder labeled Student Success Initiatives. Dr. Matthews and I watched as Mr. Morrison pulled out a thick manila folder. He opened it, and his face went completely white. Dear God, he whispered. There are detailed profiles on 12 students. Family income estimates, behavioral modification strategies. He looked up at me with stricken eyes. Mrs. Parker, she's been conducting some kind of social experiment on these children. Tommy tugged on my shirt. Mom, there's more recordings if you need them. I've been recording every time she talks to me since Halloween. Since Halloween? Tommy, that's almost 3 months of recordings. I knew something was wrong, he said simply. And I remembered what you always tell me about keeping track of important things. Mr. Morrison closed the folder carefully. Mrs. Parker, I need you to know that this is completely unacceptable and absolutely not representative of our school's values. We're going to make this right. But even as he said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Henderson's parting words were more than just an angry threat. If she'd been doing this for 12 years, how many other people knew? How deep did this go? And why was I just now finding out that my son had been living through this nightmare for months? Dr. Matthews was studying the folder over Mr. Morrison's shoulder, her face getting paler by the second. Principal Morrison, look at this page. She's been tracking which families attend school events, cross-referencing it with donation amounts, and then, oh my god. What? I moved closer, Tommy still pressed against my side. She's been seating children during assemblies based on their family's contribution level. Look, she has a seating chart from the winter concert. All the scholarship kids were placed in the back 2 rows, and she made notes about maintaining visual hierarchy for community photos. Mr. Morrison flipped through more pages, his hands actually shaking. There's an email thread in here. She's been corresponding with someone at the district office about a pilot program called Socioeconomic Integration Management. What does that mean? I asked, though I had a sick feeling I already knew. It means, Tommy said quietly, she wasn't just being mean to me. She was doing it on purpose, like homework. Dr. Matthews found another section of the folder. There are psychological profiles in here. Listen to this. Subject exhibits typical anxiety responses to social restructuring. Recommend continued behavioral modification until compliance achieved or alternative placement becomes necessary. She looked up at me with horror. She's been treating these children like lab rats. My phone buzzed with a text. Then another. Then it started ringing. Mrs. Parker? This is Janet Chen, Melissa Chen's mother from Tommy's class. I just heard what happened from another parent, and I need to tell you something important. I put the phone on speaker. Mrs. Chen, I'm here with Principal Morrison and Dr. Matthews. What do you need to tell us? My daughter has been coming home upset for weeks, saying Mrs. Henderson makes the scholarship kids sit separately during snack time. She said Tommy and 3 other children have to eat at the back table, and they're not allowed to share food with other students because their lunches are provided by the school. Tommy looked up at me with guilty eyes. I didn't want to tell you because you already worry about money for my lunches. But honey, we don't get free lunch. I pay for your meals every month. Mrs. Henderson said we do. She said anyone whose parents work certain kinds of jobs automatically gets put on the assistance list, even if they don't know it. Mr. Morrison grabbed his computer and started typing frantically. Tommy, let me check your lunch account status right now. After a few seconds, his face went red. Your account shows a 0 balance, but there's a note here that says transferred to District Assistance Program per teacher recommendation, October 15th. She transferred my son to free lunch without telling me? It gets worse, Mrs. Chen's voice came through the speaker. My daughter said Mrs. Henderson told the class that some children's parents pretend to pay for things but really can't afford them, and that the school has to help these families save face by quietly covering their costs. Dr. Matthews was staring at the folder in horror. She's been systematically humiliating these children by making their entire class think their families are lying about their financial situation. Tommy pulled on my sleeve. Mom, I have recordings of her talking about that too. She told Brandon and Sophie that their parents' donations were paying for my lunch, my supplies, even my field trip money. She said they should feel proud about helping less fortunate classmates. Field trip money? I checked my bank account on my phone. I paid $35 for your science museum trip last month. Mr. Morrison was back at his computer. According to this, that payment was refunded to you and covered by our community support fund. Mrs. Parker, she's been making it look like your family is taking charity while you've been paying for everything. Mrs. Chen spoke up again. There's something else. My daughter said Mrs. Henderson has been giving the helper kids, that's what she calls the children from donor families, extra credit points for mentoring the scholarship students. Mentoring how? Dr. Matthews asked. Teaching them appropriate behavior and gratitude practices. Melissa said Tommy and the others have to write thank you notes to the donor families every month. I felt like the room was spinning. Tommy, is that true? She said it was like a school assignment. We had to write letters thanking kids like Brandon and Sophie for making it possible for us to go to school here. His voice was barely a whisper. I wrote one to Brandon's family last week about how grateful I was that his parents paid for the monkey bars, even though Brandon pushed his kids off them. Dr. Matthews knelt down to Brandon's level. Sweetheart, did you know Tommy was writing you thank you letters? Mrs. Henderson read some of them out loud during recess. She said it was good for Tommy to practice acknowledging kindness and good for us to see our impact on others. She read his private letters out loud. My voice was getting dangerously high. She said it would help the scholarship kids feel less embarrassed about needing help if everyone knew they were grateful. Mr. Morrison closed his laptop and looked directly at me. Mrs. Parker, I'm calling an emergency school board meeting for tonight. This is beyond anything I've ever seen in 20 years of education. Mrs. Chen's voice crackled through the phone speaker. Mrs. Parker, there are 4 other families dealing with this. We've been talking, and we want to support you however we can. But Mrs. Chen, what if Mrs. Henderson was right about retaliation? What if speaking up makes things worse for our kids? Then we make sure speaking up makes things better for everyone else's kids too. The emergency school board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m., but by 5:30, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. Word was spreading through the parent network faster than I could have imagined. Mrs. Parker, this is David Kim, I teach PE at Lincoln. I need you to know that I tried to report concerns about Mrs. Henderson's classroom management to Principal Morrison twice this year, but I was told it was being handled internally. I was pacing around my tiny kitchen while Tommy sat at the table, methodically organizing his recordings by date. He'd been eerily calm since we left school, like finally telling the truth had lifted some enormous weight off his shoulders. Mr. Kim, what kind of concerns? She was pulling kids out of my class based on what she called social groupings. The scholarship students, though I didn't know that's how she was categorizing them, were always assigned to modified activities. She told me they might not have proper athletic shoes or equipment, so I shouldn't expect the same participation level. Tommy looked up from his recordings. She made me sit out dodgeball for 3 weeks because she said my sneakers weren't appropriate for high-impact activities. But Tommy, those are the sneakers we bought at the beginning of the school year. They're perfectly fine. She said they looked worn and that I might get hurt and then my mom would blame the school because we probably can't afford a doctor. Mr. Kim's voice came through the speaker, tight with anger. She's been sabotaging these children's participation in everything. I documented every conversation, Mrs. Parker. I have emails. My doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Dr. Matthews standing on my front step, still in her expensive suit but looking completely drained. I hope you don't mind me coming by, she said. I couldn't stop thinking about those recordings, and I need to apologize. Dr. Matthews, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Brandon told me more on the way home. So much more. She looked at Tommy, who was watching her carefully. Tommy, I owe you an enormous apology. My son has been hurting you for months, and I had no idea. Tommy shrugged with 8-year-old diplomacy. It's okay. He probably didn't know it was wrong. But that's just it, I think he did know. And I think Mrs. Henderson taught him that it was okay anyway. Dr. Matthews sat down heavily at our small kitchen table. Brandon told me that Mrs. Henderson has been giving him and the other donor kids special privileges. Extra computer time, first choice for classroom jobs, premium seats for movies. She told them it was because their families invested in excellence. My phone buzzed with another call. Mrs. Parker, this is Lisa Rodriguez from Channel 7 News. We received a tip about discriminatory practices at Lincoln Elementary. Would you be available for an interview? I stared at the phone. How did the news find out already? Dr. Matthews looked uncomfortable. I may have called my brother-in-law. He's a civil rights attorney in the district. He said this kind of systematic discrimination could be a federal issue. Federal? Creating separate and unequal educational experiences based on socioeconomic status violates several civil rights laws. If Mrs. Henderson has been doing this with district knowledge or support. She trailed off. Tommy held up his recorder. Should I play the one where she talks about the other schools? Other schools? Dr. Matthews and I said simultaneously. From last Tuesday. She was talking to someone on the phone about how her pilot program was being watched by administrators from 3 other elementary schools in the district. My blood went cold. Play it, Tommy. The recording was crystal clear, Mrs. Henderson's voice explaining her socioeconomic integration management system to someone she called Janet. Tracking behavioral modifications across 12 students for 4 months now. The key is documentation that shows escalating problems requiring alternative placement. I've identified 4 students ready for transfer to Westfield, and 3 more who could be moved by spring. And the district is supportive? Very. Superintendent Williams said if we can demonstrate improved overall performance metrics by removing disruptive elements while maintaining diversity quotas, we could expand to Madison and Riverside Elementary by fall. Dr. Matthews grabbed my arm. She's been planning to systematically remove low-income students from 3 schools. The voice on Tommy's recording continued. The beauty is, we're not discriminating, we're documenting legitimate behavioral concerns that happen to correlate with socioeconomic factors. Legally bulletproof. What about parent pushback? Parents from these backgrounds rarely have the resources or knowledge to effectively challenge academic recommendations. By the time they figure out what's happening, their children are already placed elsewhere. I felt sick. Tommy, how many more recordings are there? 14, he said matter-of-factly. I've been recording every day since she made me write that letter apologizing for disrupting Brandon's learning environment when he pushed me down at recess. My phone was ringing again, reporters, parents, even someone claiming to be from the state education department. Dr. Matthews looked at the growing chaos of my kitchen table covered with Tommy's evidence. Sarah, she said quietly, I think we're about to become the center of something much bigger than a bad teacher. Tommy carefully stacked his recordings and looked up at both of us with those serious 8-year-old eyes. Good. Maybe other kids won't have to feel bad about their families anymore. But as I watched the sun setting and counted the hours until the school board meeting, Mrs. Henderson's threat kept echoing in my head. You have no idea what you've just done to your son's future in this district. What if exposing her meant Tommy would face even worse retaliation? What if we just painted a target on our backs that would follow us for years? My phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Superintendent Williams. I stared at my phone screen, watching Superintendent Williams flash across it. Dr. Matthews noticed my hesitation. Answer it, she said firmly. Put it on speaker. I swiped to accept the call. Hello, this is Sarah Parker. Mrs. Parker, this is Superintendent Williams. I understand there was an incident at Lincoln Elementary today involving some recordings. His tone was carefully neutral, but something about it made my skin crawl. Tommy looked up from his stack of evidence, suddenly alert. Yes, sir. My son recorded his teacher making some very concerning statements about students from low-income families. I see. Mrs. Parker, I'm calling because I'm concerned about the welfare of your son and the other students involved. Sometimes these situations can be misinterpreted. Dr. Matthews was shaking her head vigorously, making slashing motions across her throat. Misinterpreted how? I asked. Well, teachers often use different strategies to help students from various backgrounds succeed. What might sound problematic out of context could actually be evidence of a dedicated educator trying innovative approaches. Tommy suddenly grabbed a different recorder from his pile and pressed play. Mrs. Henderson's voice filled the kitchen. Superintendent Williams said if we can demonstrate improved overall performance metrics by removing disruptive elements while maintaining diversity quotas, we could expand to Madison and Riverside Elementary by fall. The silence on the phone was deafening. Mrs. Parker, Superintendent Williams said slowly, I think there may be some confusion about. No confusion, I interrupted. My son has recordings of Mrs. Henderson discussing your pilot program to systematically transfer low-income students out of 3 elementary schools. Mrs. Parker, I strongly advise you to be very careful about making accusations you cannot substantiate. The district takes defamation very seriously. Dr. Matthews grabbed the phone from my hand. Superintendent Williams, this is Dr. Jennifer Matthews. My family has donated over $30,000 to this district in the past 2 years, and I am absolutely appalled by what I've heard today. His tone shifted immediately. Dr. Matthews, I wasn't aware you were involved in this situation. I'm involved because my son was taught to psychologically torture his classmates based on their family's income levels. And apparently, this was part of your district-wide initiative? Dr. Matthews, I think you're misunderstanding the scope of our socioeconomic integration programs. Tommy held up another recorder. Should I play the one where Mrs. Henderson talks about the money? What money? Dr. Matthews and I asked together. From 2 weeks ago. She was talking about getting paid extra for the pilot program. I grabbed the recorder and hit play. Mrs. Henderson's voice was crystal clear. Additional compensation makes it worth dealing with the more challenging aspects. $5,000 per semester, plus a bonus structure based on successful transitions to alternative placements. Janet, we're talking about an extra $15,000 this year if I can hit my targets. Superintendent Williams' voice came through the phone speaker, tight and controlled. Mrs. Parker, I'm going to need you to bring those recordings to my office first thing tomorrow morning. Actually, I said, I think I'll be bringing them to tonight's school board meeting instead. Mrs. Parker, that would be extremely unwise. School board meetings are public record. Anything discussed there becomes part of the permanent record, and that could have serious implications for your son's future in this district. There it was, the same threat Mrs. Henderson had made, just more politely worded. Dr. Matthews leaned toward the phone. Superintendent Williams, are you threatening retaliation against an 8-year-old child? Of course not. I'm simply pointing out that sometimes families who create difficulties find that their children's educational experience becomes more challenging. Teachers talk, Mrs. Parker. Principals compare notes. It would be unfortunate if Tommy developed a reputation as a disruptive influence. Tommy looked up at me with wide eyes. Mom, does that mean all my teachers will think I'm bad? The fear in his voice broke my heart and made my decision for me. Superintendent Williams, I said clearly, I'll see you at the school board meeting tonight. And I'll be bringing every single recording my son made. I hung up before he could respond. Dr. Matthews was staring at me like I'd just declared war on the entire school system. Sarah, are you sure about this? Once those recordings are public, there's no going back. Before I could answer, my phone started buzzing with text messages. Then Tommy's tablet chimed with a notification from his class app. Mom, look. He turned the screen toward me, his face pale. Mrs. Henderson posted something. The message was addressed to all Lincoln Elementary families. Dear parents, due to false accusations made against me today by a disgruntled parent, I want you to know that I have always acted in the best interests of all students. Some families, when their children face appropriate consequences for behavioral issues, choose to blame teachers rather than address the real problems. I ask for your patience as we work through this difficult situation. Mrs. Henderson. My phone immediately started ringing. The first call was from Jessica Murphy, another mom from Tommy's class. Sarah, what the hell is going on? Henderson just sent this passive-aggressive email blast making it sound like you're some kind of crazy parent. Jessica, it's much worse than that. Can you come over? I need witnesses for what I'm about to show the school board. Within 20 minutes, my living room was packed. Jessica Murphy, David and Lisa Chen, Marcus Rodriguez, and 3 other parents I barely knew. Dr. Matthews had called her husband, who arrived with a laptop and what looked like professional recording equipment. Before we start, Dr. Matthews announced, everyone needs to know this could get ugly. If the district is willing to threaten an 8-year-old, they'll definitely come after the adults. Marcus Rodriguez, whose daughter Sophia was in Tommy's class, spoke up. My kid has been having nightmares about school for 2 months. She keeps asking me if we're poor people and if that's why the other kids won't sit with her at lunch. I thought she was just being dramatic. Lisa Chen pulled out her phone. Sophia isn't being dramatic. Look at this. She showed us a photo her daughter had taken of the lunch seating chart posted in Mrs. Henderson's classroom. There were 2 distinct sections, table leaders and community-supported students. Jesus Christ, Jessica breathed. She labeled them? Tommy had been quietly listening from the stairs, but now he came down with his entire collection of recordings. Mrs. Chen, Sophia is on a bunch of these recordings. So is Marcus's daughter. Mrs. Henderson talks about all of us. He handed me a recorder labeled November 18th Parent Conference Prep. This one is about Sophia's family, Tommy said. Mrs. Henderson was practicing what to say to her dad. I pressed play, and Mrs. Henderson's voice filled the room. The Rodriguez girl is struggling academically, which isn't surprising given her background. Father works in construction, mother cleans houses. I'll recommend additional support services, but realistically, we're looking at a child who may not be suited for our accelerated curriculum. Marcus's face went red. My daughter has straight A's. What the hell is she talking about, struggling academically? Tommy pulled out another recorder. This one's worse. From last week. Mrs. Henderson's voice, I documented 3 separate incidents of Sophia disrupting group work by asking too many questions. Children from these backgrounds often overcompensate for inadequate home support by becoming attention-seeking in classroom settings. I'm recommending evaluation for possible ADHD medication. ADHD medication? Marcus exploded. She's never shown any signs of ADHD. She asks questions because she's curious and engaged. Dr. Matthews' husband looked up from his laptop. I've been researching this socioeconomic integration management program. There's no legitimate educational research supporting these methods. But there are several documented cases of similar programs being used to push out unwanted students while maintaining plausible deniability. Jessica was scrolling through her phone frantically. Oh my god. I just realized, my son Kevin has been complaining that Mrs. Henderson makes him sit in the helping corner during math time because his work is too advanced for group collaboration. I thought she was challenging him. She wasn't challenging him, Tommy said matter-of-factly. She was separating him from the scholarship kids so we couldn't get help with the hard problems. Lisa Chen looked stricken. How long has this been going on? Tommy considered this seriously. Since the first week of school. She had us fill out forms about our families on the second day. Questions about parents' jobs, whether we had computers at home, if we'd ever been on vacation to other states. That's how she identified targets, Dr. Matthews' husband said grimly. Classic profiling disguised as getting to know you activities. My phone buzzed with a call from Principal Morrison. I put it on speaker. Mrs. Parker, I need to inform you that Mrs. Henderson has filed a formal complaint against you with the district office. She's claiming harassment, invasion of privacy, and defamation of character. The room erupted in angry voices, but I held up my hand for quiet. Mr. Morrison, has anyone from the district office listened to the recordings yet? Mrs. Parker, I'm not at liberty to discuss ongoing investigations. However, I will say that the school board meeting tonight has been moved to the high school auditorium due to increased community interest. After he hung up, Marcus stood up, his jaw set. They're trying to intimidate us into backing down. Well, I said, looking around the room at these parents who'd become my allies in the span of 2 hours, I guess they're about to find out that threatening our kids was the worst strategy they could have chosen. Tommy looked up at me with a small smile. Mom, should I make copies of all the recordings for everyone? Sometimes 8-year-olds have the best ideas. By 6:30 p.m., the parking lot of Lincoln High School was packed beyond capacity. Cars were parked on grass medians and along side streets for 3 blocks in every direction. Tommy pressed his face against our car window, watching the steady stream of people walking toward the auditorium. Mom, why are there TV trucks? I counted at least 4 news vans, their satellite dishes extended like metallic flowers reaching toward the evening sky. Because what happened to you happened to other kids too, baby. And people want to make sure it stops. We'd spent the afternoon making copies of Tommy's recordings and organizing them chronologically. Dr. Matthews had brought a lawyer friend who helped us create what he called a comprehensive evidence timeline. 23 recordings spanning 4 months, documenting systematic discrimination that apparently reached all the way to the superintendent's office. But as we walked toward the auditorium, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. Small clusters of well-dressed parents were gathered near the entrance, and they were all staring at us. Not friendly curiosity, cold, assessing stares. Sarah. Jessica Murphy appeared at my elbow, slightly out of breath. You need to know, Mrs. Henderson spent the afternoon calling donor families personally. She's telling people you're trying to destroy the school's reputation and that your recordings are edited to sound worse than they are. A woman in an expensive coat approached us, her smile sharp as a blade. You must be Mrs. Parker. I'm Catherine Walsh, president of the Lincoln Elementary Parent Foundation. I recognize the name. The Walshes had donated money for the new library last year. Mrs. Walsh. I understand you have some concerns about Mrs. Henderson's teaching methods. I'm sure we can work something out privately, without all this unnecessary drama. Tommy stepped closer to me, clutching his backpack full of evidence. Mrs. Walsh's eyes flicked down to him with thinly veiled disdain. This isn't about drama, I said carefully. This is about making sure all children are treated fairly. Of course, of course. But you have to understand, Mrs. Henderson has been an exceptional teacher for over a decade. The families who've worked closely with her have seen remarkable results. Her smile never wavered. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about her methods. Dr. Matthews materialized beside me, her lawyer husband close behind. Catherine, I don't think there's any misunderstanding about telling 8-year-olds they don't deserve equal treatment because their parents aren't wealthy enough. Mrs. Walsh's composure slipped slightly. Jennifer, surely you're not taking the side of, she caught herself, but not quickly enough. The side of what, Catherine? People who want to tear down everything we've built here. Lincoln Elementary has the highest test scores in the district because we maintain standards. If we start coddling every child who claims they're being treated unfairly. Coddling? Marcus Rodriguez had arrived with Sophia, and his voice cut through Mrs. Walsh's diplomatic tone like a machete. Lady, they were making our kids write thank you letters to rich families for the privilege of attending public school. A small crowd was gathering around our conversation, and I could see phones being raised to record. Mrs. Walsh noticed too, and her mask of civility began cracking. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm sure if your daughter was asked to write thank you notes, it was part of a gratitude curriculum designed to teach appropriate social skills. Appropriate for who? Lisa Chen had joined us, along with what looked like half the families from Tommy's class. My daughter was told she couldn't participate in the science fair because sponsored students might make the competition unfair for families who pay full tuition. We don't charge tuition, Mrs. Walsh said weakly. It's a public school. Tommy tugged on my sleeve and whispered, Mom, Mrs. Walsh is on one of my recordings too. From last month. The crowd around us went quiet. Mrs. Walsh's face went pale. What recording? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tommy looked up at her with those serious 8-year-old eyes. The one where you and Mrs. Henderson talked about making a list of families who should consider other educational options. Mrs. Walsh turned and walked quickly toward the auditorium entrance, but it was too late. The damage was done, and everyone had heard. As we approached the auditorium doors, I could see this was going to be unlike any school board meeting in Lincoln's history. The auditorium was standing room only, with people packed into every available space. The school board members sat at a long table on the stage, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Superintendent Williams stood off to the side with what appeared to be the district's legal team, 3 people in dark suits with briefcases and grim expressions. But what made my heart sink was seeing Mrs. Henderson sitting in the front row, surrounded by at least 20 parents I recognized as major donors. She looked confident, almost smug, like she knew something I didn't. Mom, Tommy whispered, there's Mrs. Patterson from the school office. She keeps looking at us funny. I followed his gaze and saw the school secretary watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, but not before I caught something that looked like guilt. Dr. Matthews leaned over. Sarah, my husband just got a text from his law partner. The district filed an emergency motion this afternoon to block the recordings from being played in a public meeting. On what grounds? Privacy violations. They're claiming Tommy illegally recorded conversations without consent. My stomach dropped. Can they do that? They're about to try. School board president Margaret Stevens called the meeting to order, her voice barely audible over the crowd noise. Due to the unusual circumstances and significant community interest, we'll be addressing the situation at Lincoln Elementary first tonight. Superintendent Williams stepped to the microphone. Before we begin, I need to inform everyone that the recordings in question were obtained without proper consent and may not be admissible in this forum. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. Someone near the back yelled, then let's hear what the teacher has to say without hiding behind lawyers. Mrs. Henderson stood up slowly, smoothing her skirt. As she walked toward the microphone, I noticed several parents giving her encouraging nods and smiles. Thank you, she began, her voice steady and professional. I've been teaching at Lincoln Elementary for 12 years, and I've always put my students' needs first. Today I was falsely accused by a parent whose child has been struggling both academically and behaviorally. Tommy's hand found mine, squeezing tight. Thomas Parker has been disruptive in my classroom since September. I documented numerous incidents of aggression, defiance, and inappropriate behavior. When I attempted to address these issues through proper channels, his mother became hostile and defensive. The crowd was getting restless, but Mrs. Henderson continued. The recordings she claims to have were made by a child who was coached to misinterpret normal classroom management techniques. Thomas has a history of exaggerating incidents and... That's a lie. Marcus Rodriguez shouted from our section. You have recordings of my daughter too. Mrs. Henderson didn't miss a beat. Mr. Rodriguez, your daughter Sophia has also displayed attention-seeking behaviors that require specialized intervention strategies. Lisa Chin stood up. What about the seating charts? What about the thank you letters? Teaching gratitude and social awareness is part of our character education curriculum, Mrs. Henderson replied smoothly. Some parents apparently object to their children learning to appreciate community support. I realized with growing horror that she was twisting everything, making it sound like concerned educational practices rather than systematic discrimination. Tommy pulled on my sleeve. Mom, she's lying about all of it. Mrs. Patterson, the school secretary, suddenly stood up in the back of the auditorium. Her face was flushed, and her hands were shaking. I can't do this anymore, she called out, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. Mrs. Henderson, tell them about the second set of files. Tell them about the real documentation you've been keeping. Mrs. Henderson's confident expression faltered for the first time all evening. Marjorie, please sit down, Superintendent Williams said quickly. But Mrs. Patterson was walking toward the front now, digging in her purse. I have copies of everything. The real behavioral reports, the donor family communications, the payment records for the pilot program. She reached the microphone and looked directly at me. Mrs. Parker, I'm so sorry. I should have spoken up months ago. Mrs. Patterson pulled out a manila folder from her oversized purse, her hands trembling as she opened it at the microphone. The auditorium was dead silent now, everyone straining to hear. For 4 months, I've been watching Mrs. Henderson maintain 2 completely different sets of files on the same students, she said, her voice gaining strength. The official files that go to parents and administration, and the real files that document her actual activities. Superintendent Williams stepped toward her. Marjorie, this is highly inappropriate. You're discussing confidential personnel matters. Confidential? Mrs. Patterson's voice cracked with emotion. She made me type up invoices for her consultation fees. $1,500 from the Walshes, $2,000 from the Matthews family, $800 from the Andersons, all payments for what she called individualized classroom management services. The auditorium erupted. I heard Dr. Matthews gasp beside me. She was charging us for targeting other children? Mrs. Patterson wasn't finished. The donor families were paying extra money for Mrs. Henderson to guarantee their children received preferential treatment. And part of that service was making sure scholarship students, she looked directly at Tommy, kids like your son, were constantly reminded of their place. Mrs. Henderson shot to her feet. Marjorie, you're completely mischaracterizing a supplemental tutoring program. Supplemental tutoring? Mrs. Patterson's voice rose to nearly a shout. I have the emails, Diane. You told Mrs. Walsh that for an additional fee, you could ensure her daughter Katie would never have to work with charity case students who might slow down her academic progress. Catherine Walsh, still sitting in the front section, went white as a sheet. Several parents around her were turning to stare. Tommy tugged on my sleeve. Mom, Mrs. Patterson helped me once. When Mrs. Henderson made me sit in the hall for 2 hours because I couldn't afford the book fare, Mrs. Patterson brought me crackers. Mrs. Patterson heard him and smiled sadly. Tommy, honey, I should have done so much more. She turned back to the microphone. She wasn't just separating these children socially. She was sabotaging their academic progress deliberately. She pulled out a thick stack of papers. These are the real progress reports. Tommy Parker, actual reading level, 6th grade, 3 years above his age group. Official report filed with parents, struggling to meet grade level expectations. My mouth fell open. Tommy was reading at a 6th grade level? Sophia Rodriguez, actual math assessment scores, 94th percentile. Official report, requires additional support due to focus issues. There are no focus issues. Diane was giving her modified assignments to make her feel stupid. Marcus Rodriguez was on his feet now, his face red with fury. You mean my daughter is actually gifted and you've been making her think she's behind? Mrs. Patterson nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. All 4 of the targeted children are academically advanced. That was part of the problem. Their natural abilities were making some of the donor family's children look average by comparison. Superintendent Williams was frantically whispering with his legal team, but Mrs. Patterson kept going. The payments weren't just for preferential treatment. Families were paying to have potentially competitive students removed from accelerated programs, science fair teams, even the spelling bee. Mrs. Henderson would create behavioral incidents to justify excluding them. She held up another document. Here's the invoice to Dr. Matthews for ensuring optimal learning environment for Brandon. $1,800 to guarantee Tommy wouldn't be placed in the same reading group, wouldn't be eligible for peer tutoring, and wouldn't participate in any activities that might showcase his abilities. Dr. Matthews stood up slowly, her face a mask of horror and rage. I paid you to sabotage other children? You paid for premium educational services for your son, Mrs. Henderson said desperately. Everything I did was within the scope of differentiated instruction. Differentiated instruction? I finally found my voice, standing up with Tommy's hand still in mine. You took money to systematically destroy children's self-esteem and academic opportunities. The crowd was getting louder, angrier. I could see board members huddling together, looking panicked. But Mrs. Patterson wasn't done. There's more, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. The pilot program isn't just at Lincoln Elementary. And it isn't ending with these families. She pulled out one final document, and my blood went cold when I saw the header, Phase 2 Implementation, Middle School Transition Protocols. They have a plan, Mrs. Patterson said, to make sure these children never recover from what was done to them here. Mrs. Patterson's words hit the auditorium like a physical blow. Phase 2 Implementation, Middle School Transition Protocols. The document shook in her hands as she read from it. The plan was to follow these children to Jefferson Middle School next year and ensure they were placed in remedial tracks, regardless of their actual abilities. Mrs. Henderson has been corresponding with 3 middle school counselors, providing what she calls comprehensive behavioral and academic profiles that would guarantee these kids never get into honors classes, never qualify for advanced programs, never get recommended for high school AP tracks. Tommy looked up at me with those serious 8-year-old eyes. Mom, does that mean they were going to follow us forever? The auditorium exploded into chaos. Parents were shouting, the school board members looked shell-shocked, and Superintendent Williams was frantically trying to grab documents from Mrs. Patterson. But then something beautiful happened. Dr. Matthews stood up, her voice cutting through the noise with crystal clarity. I move for Mrs. Henderson's immediate termination and a full federal investigation into this district's practices. Seconded, called out at least 12 voices simultaneously. Mrs. Walsh tried one last desperate play. This is all being blown out of proportion. Every school has to manage diverse populations. By taking money to torture children? Marcus Rodriguez's voice boomed across the auditorium. Lady, you paid to have my daughter's confidence destroyed so your kid could feel smarter. School board president Stevens finally took control. Mrs. Henderson, you are hereby suspended without pay pending criminal investigation. Superintendent Williams, you will surrender all documents related to any socioeconomic programs to the state education department by tomorrow morning. You can't do this, Mrs. Henderson said, but her voice had lost all its authority. I have contracts, I have tenure. Tommy suddenly stood up on his chair and held up his recorder. In his clear, 8-year-old voice that somehow carried across the entire auditorium, he said, Mrs. Henderson, you made me think I wasn't smart enough to belong anywhere. But I was smart enough to record everything you said. And now everyone knows. The place went dead silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then the applause started, first from Mrs. Patterson, then from Dr. Matthews, then from every parent in that auditorium who realized they were watching an 8-year-old boy save not just himself, but potentially dozens of other children. 6 months later, Mrs. Henderson was facing federal civil rights charges. Superintendent Williams had resigned. The Socioeconomic Integration Management program had been exposed in 3 other districts, leading to a statewide investigation. Tommy tested into the gifted program at his new school, where his teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, no relation to Marcus, told me he was one of the most thoughtful and academically curious students she'd ever taught. Mom, he said one afternoon, working on homework at our kitchen table, I'm glad I recorded everything. Why's that, baby? Because now other kids won't have to write thank you letters to bullies. Dr. Matthews and her family became unlikely but genuine friends. Brandon, it turned out, was actually a sweet kid who'd been taught terrible things by an adult he trusted. He and Tommy are in robotics club together now. The best part? Last month, Tommy won the district-wide science fair with a project on sound recording technology. His ribbon hangs on our refrigerator right next to the newspaper clipping with the headline, 8-year-old's evidence exposes school discrimination ring. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most truth. And sometimes, teaching a kid to stand up for himself changes everything.